Well, good afternoon. Uh, we are ready to start our second week, uh, and we're going to cover chapters 4, 5, and 6 this evening, or this afternoon. Chapter 4 being demanding ethical and socially responsible behavior, and then we'll move to chapter 5, which is how to form a business, and then finally chapter 6, entrepreneurship and starting a small business. Some information given in Chapter 5 will, again, in some respects, be repeated in Chapter 6, but not a whole lot. So it's not like you're not going to be able to, or we're going to be saying different things. So let's look at the learning goals for Chapter 4. Get that out of there. Explain why obeying the law is only the first step in behaving ethically. Ask the 3 questions you need to answer when faced with a potentially unethical action or unethical decision that you have to make, or a decision may become unethical. Describe management's role in setting ethical standards. Distinguish between compliance-based and integrity-based codes of ethics, and then the 6 steps in setting up a corporate ethics code. Define corporate social responsibility, and compare corporations' responsibilities to various stakeholders. And then finally, analyze the role of U.S. businesses in influencing ethical behavior and social responsibility in global markets. Well, we begin here with a term called life after scandal. And maybe not a term, maybe a concept, or in some cases, things that we have even gone through. I mean, we talk about the financial meltdown that we went through starting in late 2007 and mushrooming in 2008. It caused a lot of people to lose their jobs, to lose their homes, and some other things. Now, that in itself was not a scandal, but some of the things that prompted that or scandalous type actions and decisions made on the part of some people, like predatory lending and things of that nature. The unfortunate fact is most of the people who were involved in that, who made some decisions that weren't very ethically sound, did not suffer any consequences. So what do we have to do when we have these issues? Well, we can punish people. We can, as its next bullet says, make accounting records more transparent, and then consider what is ethical, not just what is legal. And one of the reasons that this slide is pointing that out, or that particular bullet is pointing out, is that a lot of the things that some people did in fomenting the financial meltdown were not illegal. They were certainly unethical, but they were not illegal. And so we need to think about those things as we think about ethical problems and things of that nature. Now this next slide here, I'm going to go over a whole lot of this, but this talks about some of the people that we know or know about or heard of that caused some of the major ethical problems that we faced in the United States in the last roughly 30 years, maybe not quite 30 years, maybe 25, even though some of them are not mentioned. We don't go back that far. Enron is on here. Bernie Madoff is on here. WorldCom with Bernie Ebbers. Some people may not have heard about, but he caused lots of problems. And I'm not going to go through all that, but these are issues that we know and have really hurt people. I think the thing that I remember about the Madoff case is that there was a person in Massachusetts. He was in the financial field in some arena. I can't tell you exactly what. But he wrote to the Securities and Exchange Commission before Madoff was caught and told the Securities and Exchange Commission that Madoff could not be doing what he was doing. He was telling people he was going to give them X% return on their money year after year after year after year. And he told the Securities and Exchange Commission exactly what Madoff was doing. He was running a Ponzi scheme, which is what we found out he did. And yet, for some reason, the Securities and Exchange Commission didn't take any action. And Madoff had a lot of power. He was chair of the NASDAQ for a while, so we find that these people actually get into high places, and we're really not too sure how or why they got there. And there's this Ponzi scheme, and a Ponzi scheme is simply this. The only way you can pay off original investors in a Ponzi scheme is by getting new investors. And so what happens is you use the money from the new investors to pay off the original investors. And so you need to keep getting more and more and more and more investors. And what happens is these people, investors who are down here on the bottom, they eventually move up a rung or 2 rungs or 3 rungs or 4 rungs, depending upon how long they're in. There was a Ponzi scheme here a few years ago. Here I'm talking about in the general Cincinnati area. And there were some people who were fairly well known that got caught up in it. One was a former football player for the Cincinnati Bengals. Unfortunately, my aunt and uncle got caught up in it, and my aunt's brother got caught up in it. And I don't know how much money they lost. They told me, and of course I didn't ask, but it was one of those things that, and they did get some money back, but of course they lost most of the money they put in. So that's what it is. You have to keep recruiting people, if you will. So here's a question we ask that's posed: what's ethics? And it's the standards of moral behavior that society accepts as being right versus being wrong. So it's what we, society, accept. Of course, in some cases, we're using such things that go back many years and centuries, and about what societies accepted and what they didn't accept. These are basic moral values here that we're going to put on the screen, and there's nothing here, I think, that's going to be earth-shattering to anybody. What's right versus what's wrong. And right, we look at things about honesty and self-discipline and things of that nature, and wrong, of course, being things like cheating, cruelty, and a few other things. We don't have to go through that whole set, and we know them when we see them. I like this next slide because it is in your text. You can see this little cartoon, if you will, at the bottom of page 92 about what plagiarism is. And plagiarism has, maybe today it's a lot different than what it used to be, but plagiarism is simply using someone else's work and then palming that off as your own. One of the concerns a lot of people have today is the internet. We can go to Google or some other search engine and find all kinds of information on it. And it's okay to use that information, but you have to attribute it, or the source, where I got this information. And then another thing you have to do is you have to verify that information. That's why we academics always say we frown on the use of Wikipedia. And the reason we frown on the use of Wikipedia isn't because Wikipedia is bad. It's not. It's because anybody can post on Wikipedia. And therefore, we don't know all the time if the information being posted on Wikipedia is accurate. Now, Wikipedia can be used, if you want to use it, as a good first source to find other sources. But Wikipedia should never be used as a primary or secondary source, primary source mostly, for any research that you're doing, simply because of the fact we don't know who's editing, etc. Because anybody can post on Wikipedia. So I mean, I could get in and post on Wikipedia and talk about Einstein's theory of relativity, and I don't have any standing to do that, but there's nothing that stops me from doing it. So I only use that as an example. So I'm not telling you don't use Wikipedia. What I'm telling you is don't use Wikipedia as a source. Use Wikipedia to help your search. Now, as I mentioned to you last week, we have ethical scenarios, and I certainly encourage you to look at the ethical scenarios. This particular one is Facebook or Fake Book, and just to read the little scenario. It doesn't take very long. It's usually a couple of paragraphs, and look at the questions and mentally answer them. Now, when you're facing an ethical dilemma, and an ethical dilemma is when you have two equally unappealing choices. And normally speaking, an ethical dilemma is something where you're going to have, as your text talks about, two equally unsatisfactory alternatives. Normally, we think about an ethical dilemma as being something that's going to be bad, and the other alternative is going to be worse. But regardless of how we want to couch that, there are several questions that we can ask, and they're posted here on the screen. You can find these in your text on page 93 and 94. So the first question you should ask yourself is, what I propose to do legal? In other words, will I get in trouble with the law if I do this? The second is you should ask, is it balanced? In other words, will all constituents, all stakeholders, maybe is a better way to put this, will they be treated fairly? Is it a win-lose thing? If I do this, am I going to come out on top and somebody else is going to be severely in the hole? And then finally, how will I feel about myself after I make this decision? I like to say, can I look myself in the mirror after I've made this decision and like what I see? And I also like to add one that's not here, but it's kind of implied here. And that is, how will my family and friends feel if they see my decision broadcast or telecast on the 11 o'clock news? And I think if we can answer all these questions in the affirmative, then we're on solid ground. This particular slide, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, talks about various people and companies that bribed folks, and then what the potential loss to them was. And it's not any one we have to go after, but it's something we have to think about. Now, this is a very, very good slide here, because what it says to us is that ethics, especially in a company, ethics starts at the top. And we cannot have an ethical organization if, first of all, the code of ethics does not come from the top, signed by the president and CEO of the company, maybe by the board of directors as well, and that the president, CEO of the company, whoever he or she is, lives up to what that says, and each of the other executives in the company. So it is, the old saying is, it's walking the talk and talking the walk. And what it simply means is, this is what I say, and this is what I do, and they're consistent. And that's what we're talking about here. These are the things that influence managerial ethics. Uh, Values, work background, family status, personality, etc. And then we go over and look at some of the rest of them. So that's individual. Then we have organizational. Then we have environmental. All those factors influence things. And the unfortunate fact is that often a manager, move that person up a little bit, say a senior executive, he or she does something and it's not ethical and it's condoned and everybody sees that. And so what happens is they tend to, the folks that see that, they tend to emulate it. And so they continue to do that. I had a text that I read. Wasn't a text. It was a book that I read when I was at Virginia Tech in my doctoral studies, and it was about ethics. It's called Moral Mazes, the ethics of the corporate world. I don't think that's the right subtitle. I don't have the book with me tonight. And what a senior vice president of a former Fortune 500 company, former senior vice president of a Fortune 500 company, says in there what the ethics that person does in the business is not the ethics that he or she practices at home or in his or her church. It's what the guy above you wants. And so what he was saying is that ethics in the business world is a lot different. Well, it shouldn't be. And that's what we're trying to say here. If we want people to be ethically at home, act ethically at home, act ethically at church, we should expect them to act ethically in the business world. And that's kind of what this is saying. Now, there are two kinds of ethical codes. I suppose you could say there's more than two kinds of ethical codes, but for our purposes, we're going to talk about two. And one is, and you can see these in the figure 4.3 in the text on page 97. Compliance based on the left-hand side of the figure and integrity based on the right-hand side. Compliance based simply means you're following the law, and it doesn't mean anything more than that. And that people who break the law will be penalized. An integrity-based code is entirely different than that. It speaks to the company's values, and it notice here what it says. It creates an environment to support those and ethically sound behavior. Now, I'd like to digress here and tell a little story about Mars Candy. Mars Candy has its thing called its operating principles, and I don't have the exact thing of this, but anyway, many years ago, one of its cocoa bean buyers was down in Central or South America, and he came upon a broker who was financially distressed, and so he bought the cocoa beans from this guy at less than the going price. And he got back to the home office and he thought that Mars would pat him on the back for saving a considerable amount of money. And Mars said, wait a minute, or senior management at Mars said, wait a minute, we don't do business like that. We have this principle we call mutuality. Mutuality says we treat others as we would expect them to treat us. And we may be in that guy's situation sometime and we would want to be treated fairly. So Mars tore up the contract and went back to the buyer and said, send a new contract at the regular price, and that's what we're going to pay. And they admonished their salesperson, their buyer. So that's what this is talking about. Mars said we have a higher standard, and we simply aren't going to lower our standard. Now this is a what I want to say here. This is a laundry list of saying how we're going to improve business and ethics. And, we started out by saying this earlier, top management has to set the tone. And they have to have ethical code in writing, and then it has to be in practice. employees have to understand that they're expected to behave ethically, just as the senior managers do. And then everybody has to be trained on what happens if you do something wrong, on the implications of your decisions, the ethical implications of your decisions. Now we continue with this. There should be somebody in there that an ethics office that people can, especially in a large company, that people can talk to on an anonymous basis. Hello, Ms. Simmons. And that there should be some protection for people known as whistleblowers. Whistleblowers are usually not liked by folks because they tend to take the high road and they don't care about who gets hurt and things of that nature. But on the other hand, if they expose illegal, unethical behavior, then they really should be championed. Unfortunately, for the most part, they're not. Also, an ethical, ethical considerations to improve, you should include suppliers and people of that nature, so they know that. And then finally, whatever you put in writing has to be enforced. And it's as simple as that. You can't do that. You can't expect people to comply with your ethics if you don't enforce what you want to do. And then preventing unethical behavior, it kind of goes along with what we just said. People have to know what is expected and what is not tolerated. Have to have a code of ethics. Have the policies have to be there. They have to be enforced, and people who are the transgressors have to be held accountable. And then there should be some sort of ethical training for all employees on a routine basis. Then ethical considerations should always be part of the decision-making process. There has to be accountability. We kind of really talked about that before, but just saying it here again. Organizations have to take action when there's a crisis occurs. I'll come back to that in a second. And then finally, employees have to know that they have to defend the company. This is what our company stands for. This is our reputation, and we stand behind that. About 30 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit less, there was a miscreant in Chicago that was going through some large drugstores or pharmacies and injecting cyanide into bottles of Tylenol. And unfortunately, a number of people bought those contaminated bottles of Tylenol and were either sickened or died. The makers of Tylenol, Johnson & Johnson, was proven very early on that they had nothing to do with this. Didn't come in the factory. It wasn't a factory issue. Johnson & Johnson took the high road and immediately pulled all the Tylenol in the United States off the market and said no Tylenol would be sold again until they could assure the public that it was free from tampering. And that's the kind of ethical behavior we're talking about. Tylenol did not have to do that. Johnson & Johnson did not have to do that, but it did because it was the right thing to do. Corporate social responsibility, CSR. This is where businesses show concern for the general welfare of the environment in which they operate. Now, that environment is business environment as well as the environment that we share with all other creatures on the universe. Notice that it's a commitment to integrity, to fairness, and to respect. Those are three things that are very important. Corporate responsibility also has a corporate philanthropy leg, if you will. That's made up of charitable donations, and then social initiatives. That's kind of an enhanced form of corporate philanthropy, if you will. Now, this particular slide shows us, if you will, all that is within corporate social responsibility or corporate responsibility. Notice it talks about hiring minority workers, making safe products, minimizing pollution. So these are all things that are part of this corporate responsibility and then corporate social responsibility, because those are social issues that we have to think about. And corporate policy is just a position that a firm takes, and that it lets the general public know where it stands on particular social and political issues. These are some positive impacts that companies have. Notice I'm not going to go through this, what Xerox offers, social service leave program and things of that nature. This is kind of a slide to think about. What would you like to see? What would you like to have happen? How companies do that. And notice that now this data that's here is a little dated because text was published a couple of years ago, so the data they gathered was a couple of years earlier than that. For the most part, that 2/3 of MBA students say that they would work for a company that offered a lower salary if it was socially responsible. And I hope that continues. This is just talking about, it's the gee whiz slide, like I like to talk about personalities that we know and what they give back and how they give back and the different organizations that they support. And then this is the world's generous guys, the world's biggest givers, people like Bill Gates and Warren Buffett, etc. I'm not going to spend any time on that. Not that that's not important, but it's not something we need to spend time on. President Kennedy enumerated 4 consumer rights. And these are very important to think about because we don't always think about them. Right to safety, right to be informed. A lot of manufacturers didn't like having to put ingredients labels on things because of cost. And of course, the thing about that is that cost gets passed along to the consumer, so I don't know why they got concerned about it. A right to choose whatever you want to do, and then finally the right to be heard. And that simply means that if you have a complaint, you are allowed to pass it on, and people should pay attention to that and act upon it. This is just how the customers know. It's sort of a thing that tells us social media lets us know if a company's being socially responsible or not. Not something that we haven't seen in the past, but certainly something that we find more and more in the marketplace today. This is just social customer contact. This is something do's and don'ts of Twitter. I'm not going to get into that, but it's there. It'll be up tomorrow. You can read that if you wish. Now, this is the thing that we have to be concerned about, and I really kind of wonder why this was not brought up in the beginning of the chapter. And this is insider trading. This is where people have information that's not available to the general public, and they act upon it, usually to buy or to sell stock. And what happens is they either make a lot, well, they usually tend making a lot of money. Now, the one case that I think that you may know about that was when Martha Stewart got, well, she got sentenced to jail. She got convicted and sentenced to jail for insider trading. I paid attention to that for a while. I'm not going to tell you I didn't think Martha Stewart was guilty, but I think that whoever the prosecutor was trying to make her an example to other people. I'm not saying she wasn't guilty. Please don't misunderstand me. And I'm not a Martha Stewart fan, so I'm not, here defending her case. I just think that they wanted to make a statement about that, to say that we're going to go after anybody regardless of his or her size, standing, and however much money was being made. This is a company's responsibility to employees. We don't often think about that. It's to create jobs. As to treat employees with respect. And finally, it's to offer salaries and benefits that at least offer what I consider to be, and what most people would consider to be, a living wage. This particular slide says so they can reach their full potential. This is just a list of America's most admired companies. This data goes back to 2012, I believe. Yeah, so it's probably a little old. This is the reason why employees are upset. And we have to be concerned about this because this particular slide talks about employee fraud. And fraud costs businesses a lot of money, and fraud may actually impact upon the consumer, that's us, buying products that are not made with the standards to which the manufacturer says they were made. And this is talking about disgruntled employees and what they do and how they do things. Notice what the first particular slide says. Fraud accounts for about 5% of annual revenue. That's a good percent of revenue, especially when some companies are on margins of 1 and 2%. And then that accounts for 30% of all business failures. 1/3 of the business failures in the United States on a yearly basis are caused by fraud. That's pretty serious, and it's something that ought to make us stand up and take notice. And then here's what people do when they're disgruntled. They blame others, they hoard resources, they do a lot of other type things. And sometimes these folks are clever enough that other people don't find them until it's too late, unfortunately. This just talks about society and the environment. 1/3 of us receive our salaries from nonprofit organizations. We do have a green movement in the country, although I think it's kind of stalled right now. And I think a lot of that has to do with the political climate in Washington. The leaders of both houses of Congress don't believe there's such a thing as global warming. They don't believe the science behind it or the facts or anything else. Regardless of that, most companies are trying to reduce what's known as their carbon footprint. Now, I was at a conference, and I'm going to bring that in for when we get into chapters 7, 8, and 9 next week. I was at a conference in Miami a couple of months ago and talking about sustainability. And I'm not going to try to get ahead of myself because I have to pull that paper up and bring the salient points into you. But there is a thought process that as people are becoming more and more efficient, people being companies, manufacturers, becoming more and more efficient, that actually what they're doing is that they're producing more, and that's causing people to consume more. So if you look at it from that respect, that even though they're reducing the amount of water they use, the amount of resources they use, If people are consuming more, then perhaps they're not being as efficient and as green friendly as they would think to be. So I'll talk a little bit more about that next week, but I did want to talk about it just a little bit here this afternoon. We do have a responsibility for the environment. We only have one. We're not going to get another, and we have to do our best to protect it. That is incumbent upon all of us. But other people can do more than we can. Manufacturers can do more than we can. But whatever you can do, you do whatever you can to reduce that, because you want to leave something for your children and grandchildren. This is just a list of some worthy causes of what you can do, and if you want to spend some money and what it will save in the environment. If you have enough to spend $1,000, you can help save 5 acres of land in Louisiana for wetlands conservation. Excuse me. This is what's known as social social auditing. This is evaluation of an organization's resources and its progress toward implementing social responsible behaviors and manufacturing. And this types of auditing watchdogs. We have people who are socially conscious investors, environmentalists, union officials, customers, etc. This is a bugaboo that many American companies simply don't like. And I shouldn't say it's a bugaboo. What I should have said, something that many American companies don't like, and that is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which was passed by Congress in the 1970s. It prohibits any American company from securing business through the use of a bribe. And what it simply says is that you American company doing business overseas have to abide by American laws. A lot of companies don't like that. A lot of individuals don't like that. They say, well, that's the way of life down here or over here or someplace else, and we should be allowed to do that. And I would tell you that I think that's faulty thinking. If you have to do business a certain way in the United States, why wouldn't you continue to do business that way someplace else? We don't have to sink to the level of other people. This is just a kind of a gee whiz slide here. I'm not going to go through it. An organizational culture clash. It talks about Motorola. Half of their employees live outside the United States, and talks about what he has to do. This is ethical culture clash. You'll find this in your text. I suggest that you look at it. It kind of presents some problems, some issues, and how you would handle them, etc. So we have to stop and think about what's being asked of us when we're working overseas, and whether or not we intend to continue doing business that way, or we're going to adhere to and abide by the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So that is a really good, I think, overview of ethics and corporate social responsibility, corporate social behavior. We are at almost 5:10. We'll take a break. Let me ask if you have any questions. All right, we'll take a break now. So I just went to 5:10, so we'll take a break at 5:15 and come back with chapter 5, which is we're going to talk about how to farm a business and the 3 forms of business. Thank you. Please come back at 5:15. All right, it's 5:15. We're back. We're going to talk about how to farm a business, and what we're going to speak about in this next 40 or 50 minutes is the three forms of business that we find in the United States, and we'll go through those. And in some respects, you'll get an idea about forming a business. But the next chapter, chapter 6, will actually talk about starting a business. So you get some kind of idea here of the type of business. Now, type of business, not meaning the type that you want to go into, like retail or selling photograph records or something of that nature, as opposed to type of business being sole proprietor, partnership, etc. So let's look at the learning outcomes for learning goals for this chapter. Compare and contrast the advantages and disadvantages of sole proprietorship, which is the most popular form of business and the largest. Describe the difference between general and limited partners. And then we're going to compare the advantages and disadvantages of this type of business. Then we're going to compare the advantages and disadvantages of a traditional C corporation. Those are large companies that we know. General Motors would be one, Ford would be another, General Electric. And then the difference between them, a C corporation, S corporations, which are slightly different, and then limited liability companies. Then we're going to hopefully define and give examples of 3 types of corporate mergers and explain the role of things called leveraged buyout and taking a firm private. By the way, to give you an idea of taking a firm private, Michael Dell took Dell Computers private. It is no longer a publicly traded company. It's happened in the last year. Outline the advantages and disadvantages of franchises and discuss opportunities for diversity in franchising and the challenges of global franchising. By the way, there's challenges to franchising within the United States. And then we're going to explain the role of cooperatives. We touched on these 3 forms of ownership within the United States, and you find this throughout the world. I don't think you'll find any different ones. We won't talk about something that is partially government owned and partially owned by an individual, which we find in some economies outside the United States. But we have in the United States sole proprietorship, partnership, and corporations. Now, sole proprietorship, exactly what it says. It's a business owned and operated by one person. That person can have more than him or herself working. Can be a number of people working for them, but it's called sole proprietorship because there's only one owner, and it's private. And the reason I say that is because if the owner decides to sell stock, he or she may still be the primary owner, but there's more than one owner. He may have he or she may have all the responsibilities of running the business and finances and everything else, but there's more than one owner when you have stock ownership. Partnership, 2 or more people who agree, and notice the term before that, agreed legally to become partners and co-owners of a business. And then the next thing to talk about is the C corporation, the big corporations that I talked about. It is a legal entity, and that's important to think about. A legal entity with authority to act and has liability apart from its owners. Owners in this case being stockholders. All right. These, again, here are the forms of business in the United States. And I just want you to look at this slide. And I think you can see this slide. Find us, yeah, at the bottom of page 116, figure 5.1 in the text. I'll blow this up just a little bit for you in case you don't have your text handy. Notice that the percentage of businesses in the United States, 72%, almost 3/4 of the business in the United States are sole proprietorships. But on the right-hand side, we have the percentage of total receipts. Only 6% of the total receipts come from the United States, come from sole businesses, sole ownership, sole proprietor businesses. All right. This particular slide just talks about, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, cities with the most minority run and most likely minority owned firms in the United States in ranking. Atlanta ranks #1. Now we're going to talk here about sole proprietorship, the largest number of businesses in the United States. We just found out almost 75% are sole proprietors. And this particular slide lists the advantages of sole proprietorship. You can see these enumerated on page 117 in the text, below Warren Brown here, that's Warren Brown, below his picture. And I'm not going to read all of these to you, but the things that stand out: you can open one of these businesses whenever you want, and you can close it whenever you want. Obviously, you're your own boss. You don't have any special taxes. I'll get to that in a second. You can keep all of the revenue, all of the profit for yourself. You don't have to share it with anybody. Now, let's talk about no special taxes. The reason that there is no special taxes is because you're a sole proprietor and you're taxed as an individual. So you and the business are one. There's no divorce here. You can't divorce that. You and the business are one. And so that's the reason there's no special taxes. Obviously, you have to report the income, but there's no special taxes. So those are the advantages. They come to you because you can do whatever you want with the business. I mean, obviously as long as it's legal, but you can do whatever you want to with it. You don't have to ask anybody's permission to do anything. You can do whatever you want. But with every advantage, there has to be some disadvantages. And the first one and the foremost one is #1 up here: unlimited liability. Everything, any debt that the business has runs up, you're liable for. You have to pay. You don't have any choice in that matter. And notice what it says, or it could mean you'd have to sell your house, sell your car, give up some savings, whatever it happens to be. And because of that, the next one comes in there. You usually tend to have fewer financial resources to help you along. There's other type things. It can be overwhelming because you have to take care of management, you have to take care of finance, you have to take care of a lot of other things. The next one, it talks about few fringe benefits. I can't think of any fringe benefit. Unless you say pride in ownership is a fringe benefit. Now, by the way, here, I'm not trying to denigrate sole proprietors. Don't misunderstand me. They are a backbone of the United States business economy. But those folks work hard, and they don't get any time off. Notice the last couple are limited growth, and usually limited growth is due to finances, and then finally limited time being in business. What we find is that in sole proprietorships, a lot of times the kids don't want the business. And I'll give you a perfect example. My son-in-law's father owned and operated a very successful retail business in Lexington, Kentucky for many, many, many years. And after a number of years of thinking about it, he finally sold the store. But one of the reasons he sold the store was he had 3 children. None of the children wanted to take over the business. And I mean, he's happy he did what he did, but that's what that's talking about, lifespan. A lot of the second generation simply don't want the headaches that their parent had. Now, there are really 2 kinds of partnerships. There's a general partnership. That's 2 or more people who get involved and they share things equally. and that includes money coming in and money going out. A limited partnership is somewhat different than that, where you have one or more general partners and then one or more limited partners, and the limited partners are only liable for the amount of money they put into the organization, no more, no less, and many times the limited partner has no say in operations of the partnership. Now, these are the types of partners we kind of talked about before. The general partner, and a little bit different than what we mentioned before. General partner is somebody who is actively involved in the operations of the business. A limited partner, notice here, limited amount of money, like I said before, enjoys limited liability only to the amount of the money that he has or she has invested in the organization. And the last part is just as important, maybe even more so. His or her personal assets are not at risk. That's different from a general partner. We have a couple of other partnerships. We have a master limited partnership and a limited liability partnership. Don't really see a whole lot of these. The other ones are what we see most often. The first looks like a corporation, but it's taxed like a partnership and therefore doesn't have the corporate income tax. A limited liability partnership is just like that limited partner we talked about before. They limit the risk of losing personal assets. Notice to outcomes only of their acts and the omissions of those under their supervision. All right. Partnerships obviously have some advantages, and they are more resources. You have an opportunity to share management responsibilities. I knew a partnership in Indiana many years ago, and the two guys, had a retail operation, and the one person stayed in the office and he ran the business, and the other person was out drumming up sales, and that's how they ran their business. Obviously, because you have more financial assets, you have a better chance for longer survival. And again, as with a sole proprietorship, there are no special taxes. Again, because you're individuals and that's the way you're in business, and you're going to be taxed as individuals, not as a company, not as a corporation, and so there's no individual. There's no additional tax. That's the way I want to say that. But of course, as we talked about before, there are advantages. There come disadvantages. And it's the same way with the sole proprietorship, and that is unlimited liability. And again, that could mean losing property and things of that nature to pay off debts. Partners are the company, and the company are the partners, and you can't get away from it. Obviously, you have to divide the profits, and the profits have to be divided equally unless there is some written agreement otherwise. And if you have some written agreement otherwise, that might cause some problems, unless the person who is getting fewer dollars, may have agreed to that at the beginning. Obviously, you're going to have disagreements, and because there are two of you, and there usually tends to be a contract, it is difficult to terminate that business. It could be something like one person would agree to buy out the other person, and the guy says, well, yeah, but I don't have the resources to do that. And then the other guy or gal says, well, I'm going to sell anyway. Well, you can't do that because that's not in the contract. So those are all kinds of issues that have to be considered, taken into consideration, hammered out, etc., when you're thinking about starting one of these businesses. This is just a spotlight on small business. You can find that in your text on page 121 at the top. This just talks about there's no such thing as a perfect partner. And you really have to stop and think about that. And some of the questions you have to ask yourself, do we share the same goals? What can this person bring to the business that I can't bring to the business? How does he or she make decisions? Do we trust each other? I mean, I think that ought to be the first question. You need to think about these things as you go through this process if you want to get into business with someone. I'm not trying to dissuade anybody from doing that. I'm just saying that what happens is people don't sit down at the beginning in a logical, rational manner and figure these things out. And those things have to be done. A lot of people will tell you that a partnership is like a marriage, and I will tell you it's not. And I think you have to think about it that way. Yes, there is a commonality, the commonality being the business, but it's a lot different than being in a marriage, because that makes there's a family involved there, whether there's only two or there's more than two. So it's a lot different. I don't think anybody should ever think about it that way. I know people do, but I don't think that's the way to think about it. So there's a lot of things to think about, not only when going into business for yourself as a sole proprietor, but going into business with a partner. Stop and think about things that you want to do, and then we kind of get into a little bit of that in the next chapter when we talk about the business plan. Now we're getting into what we call here the C corporation. That is the corporation that we think of. It's the big behemoth, 500-pound girl on the block, or whatever you want to say. And notice that, again, here we talk about it being a legal entity, usually chartered in a state, a particular state. I'll come back to that in a second. And it has authority to act and liability that is separate from its owners. That's the stockholders. A stockholder is never liable for any more money than what he or she invested. I mentioned usually chartered in a state. The most favored state in the United States for setting up a corporation is Delaware. Delaware has very business-friendly laws of incorporation. I'm not from Delaware, and I'm not up on the laws, but you will find that many large companies that you know of, even though their headquarters are not in Delaware, very, very small state, they are incorporated there. And I'll give you the example that I know best. And it's only because my wife and I own Coca-Cola stock, and I mention that now because if I talk about it later, that's a disclaimer I want to give you. Coca-Cola's headquarters is in Atlanta, Georgia, and yet it's incorporated in the state of Delaware. All right. Corporations have a lot of advantages. Limited liability being number one. because they're large, they can raise huge amounts of money. They can stay in business forever. There is ease of ownership change, or can be, because they are large and because they offer numerous benefits. Their ability to attract talented employees is much greater than smaller companies. And again, we have separation of ownership and management. Now, that's becoming more contentious today as stockholders become more and more independent. Years ago, it was very common for when stockholders would vote, they would just vote whatever the company said to vote. That doesn't happen as much today. And so as many stockholders, especially those that own more stock or own large blocks of stock, are becoming more and more active and trying to take roles in the management of a company. Now I'm going to blow this slide up just a little bit here and give you some idea. You can see this graphically displayed, figure 5.4 on page 125, how owners affect management. So if you look at the bottom part of the slide, we have what I call rank and file employees on the bottom, then we have managers or supervisors in the middle, and then the upper level senior executives and CEO. Then you have the board of directors who is responsible for hiring the senior executives. And then you have the stockholders, the owners of the company, who are responsible for electing the board of directors. Now, these folks up here at the top, the owners, they can't tell management what to do except by their votes. In other words, I couldn't walk into Atlanta, the headquarters of Coca-Cola in Atlanta, and start telling management what to do. First of all, I don't own that much stock, but in the second place, even if I did, I couldn't do that because there are protocols. But these folks, the stockholders, are the ones who really have the authority to do certain things by their votes. And they're trying to be, stockholders are trying to be more activists today and holding management to account and boards of directors to account. There was a story, I shouldn't say a story, it was an article that ran in New York Times, and I'm sure the Wall Street Journal, a few other ones, about, I think it was Xerox, bought an English company for a lot of money. And, it seems to me it was billions of dollars. And this company was supposed to be able to do something for, I can be wrong about Xerox, but I'm pretty sure it was. And no, it was Hewlett Packard. I'll take that back. And the next thing we know, the company that they bought in England went bankrupt. And somebody said, where was the board of directors doing their financial review of this company and their due diligence? And a lot of money was spent, and Hewlett Packard had to write that loss off. So there's a responsibility here, and that's why we find today that the stockholders are trying to inject themselves more and more into what's going on through their election of the board of directors. This is just a slide that gives you the largest corporation in the United States. I'm not going to spend any time on that. Walmart, Exxon, etc. The companies that are listed on this slide, and I'll blow this up just a little bit for you so you can look at it. These companies are privately held. They are not publicly traded companies. They do not have stockholders. And you can notice them here. And, some of them Mars Candies, Chrysler. You may know certain parts of the country, you may know Public Supermarkets. And certainly if you pay attention to politics, you ought to know who the Koch brothers are. This is the slide that gives us the disadvantages of corporations. It's an enormous cost to get them incorporated. There are 2 tax returns. That's that double taxation. Dividends, if they're paid, have to be paid after taxes. They can't be paid before taxes. It becomes, in many cases, too large to manage. It's difficult to terminate. And then, of course, the last one is, I kind of alluded to it as I was talking about conflict between stockholders and the boards of directors. And I think we're going to find as we go through the next several years that we're going to see more and more of these conflicts between stockholders and boards of directors than we've seen perhaps in the past. This just talks about companies that made mistakes in trying to bring out new product. And I'm not going to read those. The one that I will mention to you is Coca-Cola decided that it had to bring out a new flavor of Coke, and they were going to retire old Coke. And the new flavor lasted, as the slide says, 77 days. And the new flavor is gone, never to be seen again. Now, we go into a different concept here, and these are S corporations. S corporations are like the traditional C corporation in a way. They are a unique government entity that, again, looks like a corporation, but these folks are taxed as sole proprietors. There are shareholders, directors, and employees, and then there's a benefit of limited liability as mentioned here. But notice that profits are only taxed at the individual rate, as personal income of the stockholder. There's been some concern, and I read an article in the New York Times the last several months. There's been some concern that there's too many S corporations, and that the government really hasn't paid a lot of attention to them. So what's going to happen with that, whether the government's going to do something different or not, I don't know. But I suspect we're going to be hearing more about S corporations and whether or not the government is going to continue allowing them. That may also be true with limited liability corporations. Excuse me just a second. Now here's what qualifications for a S corporation. Can't have any more than 100 stockholders. Notice that they must be individuals who are citizens or permanent residents of the United States. One class of stock, we'll get into stock a little bit later. No more than 25% of the income can come from passive sources. Passive source would be like rent. In other words, you're not making something and selling it. You're getting it. It's not an active type thing. Rent is not an active type thing. If the S corporation loses its status, it cannot reapply for 5 years. It says can't operate on it for 5 years, but that's the same thing. Now we're going to move from those folks to limited liability corporations. Similar to an S corporation, but they don't have the same eligibility requirements. You see LLCs that are physicians groups and lawyers, and things of that nature. Again, limited liability, but notice they have a choice of taxation. Flexible ownership rules, operating flexibility. There's some disadvantages. No stock, so you cannot transfer ownership. Again, limited lifespan, fewer incentive, taxes can be different, and there's a lot of paperwork. I'm not going to get into virtual companies. Now, we're going to talk here a little bit about mergers and acquisitions. And a merger is when two companies join together as equals. They form one company. They join they join as equals. And I want you to think of it in that fashion, even though one company may be larger than the other, because when they join, they become one company. So in essence, they're equals. Yeah, one may have larger, may have more assets and things of that nature, but if they make a different company, become a new company altogether, they actually joined as equals. An acquisition is when one company buys out another company. So that's not a merger. And we have to think of it in that fashion. And usually there tends to be friction when that happens. And one of the reasons it happens to be is because people who are in the acquired company still think they have some autonomy, and then suddenly one day they find out they don't. And the reason they don't is because, well, if you guys are so good, why were you bought out in the first place? These are just companies that keep growing. We're not going to spend any time on that. Now we're going to talk about different types of mergers: vertical, horizontal, and conglomerate. Vertical, two companies coming together in different stages of related business. Horizontal, two companies, notice, in the same industry, and because they've come together, it allows them to expand their line of products, maybe even diversify it into something else. And a conglomerate unites firms that were completely unrelated, different industries altogether, in order to diversify business operation and investments. A leveraged buyout is exactly what it says. This is when a group of employees or managers or whatever, investors, buy out stockholders in a company. This is types of leveraged buyouts. And then I'm not going to get into that differentiation here about dollars and cents, but it's not something we need to worry about. The next we do need to think about, and that's franchising, because that's big business in the United States. A company is in business and signs an agreement with an individual that allows that individual to operate some type of an entity, a store of some kind for the most part, and to use the franchisor, the big business, to use that name and to sell those products. And the person who enters into that contract is known as the franchisee. Notice we have 825,000 franchise businesses in the United States. Now, again, this data is probably a little dated, and we may have more than that today. This just gives you some of the new franchisees on the market or in the market, and we're not going to pay a lot of attention to that. franchises have an advantage. First of all, a person who becomes a franchisee can get management help and marketing assistance. Of course, he or she is a business owner now, and that's his or her own business. If you're in with franchise, you have a nationally recognized name. There's a much lower failure rate, and then you can get financial assistance if you need it. But of course, there are disadvantages, and the primary one, pardon me, is a large startup cost. The last I heard, it was some years ago, it cost over $500,000 to open a McDonald's franchise, maybe more than that today. What shared profit simply means is this, that if you make $1 profit, earn $1 profit, the franchisor is going to take some part of that. That's known as a royalty. And you have to pay that. So you don't have a choice in that matter. That's in the contract. And that guy or gal, that franchisor is going to get, he or she's going to get that money first. So if they get 3 cents of your dollar, or 5 cents, or whatever it happens to be, they get that first before you get 95 cents. Coattail effects, what that simply means is this, that can either be good or bad. If you're in an area and it's going well, you're probably okay. If you're in an area that's not going well, you're probably going to be in trouble. The franchisor can tell you if you can sell and to whom you can sell. And then, of course, last but not least, we always have people in business that are not doing the things that they should be doing, and they wind up costing people money. We call them fraudulent. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but what it does say is that women in the United States own half of the franchises. So we need to stop thinking about franchisees only being men. Well, notice here, let me go back here because I want to read this again. They own half of the U.S. companies. I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. Half of the U.S. companies, but only 25% of the franchises. So that's kind of a little different, isn't it? You wouldn't think that would be an issue. More minorities are in franchises, and I think that's something that we need to not only champion, but we have to recognize that that's going to continue as the demographics in this country changes. Home-based franchises, what I would tell you about this is if you're going to get into these home-based franchises, make sure that there's a way to earn a profit. Some of them it's difficult to earn a profit with. So just make sure that you know what it is and you're not restricted in territory and things of that nature. This gives you some advantages. Obviously, if you're at home, you're home. You're not out fighting traffic and doing a few other things. But in any home-based business, whether it's a franchise or not, you're isolated, and you have to think about that. And so that can be a cause for concern. And then, of course, obviously, long long hours. But there's going to be long hours no matter where the franchise is, whether it's out a street corner or someplace else. This just gives you some different types of home-based franchises, Jazzercise, and a few other ones. E-commerce, we know what this is. We know that, I won't say it's the wave of the future or the future's here. What I will say is we're going to find it changing the marketplace even more than it's already changed it. Do I still expect brick and mortar stores to be around? Yes, I do. I think that those probably will never go away, but it will make some big differences in a lot of companies and how a lot of companies do business. Global franchising. Look at Canada is the most popular target for U.S.-based franchises, but we know, we talked about not too long ago, and we'll see when we get into later chapters, that McDonald's is franchised virtually around the world. One of the reasons that Canada is favored for us is because, for the most part, except in small parts of Canada, they speak our language and they have a common background. And of course, the French-speaking don't, but by and large, they're pretty close to our thought process. They're a little bit different in some respects, but obviously, we're going to go places where we think we can do well, and we have some commonality. Here's some thoughts about picking a franchise. If you're going to get into this, stay with something that's tried and true. Obviously, be careful about being too parsimonious and pinching pennies. Have a fallback choice. That simply means if you can't get this one, you can go with something else. Last one, don't assume the franchise is going to pay off. And the one thing that I always like to mention here, I've never been a franchise owner, don't misunderstand, but it always has occurred to me, especially when you're talking about eating establishments, that they are successful no matter what they are, based upon the location. And that's critical for any franchise. Well, it's critical for any business, but particularly for a franchise. You need to be in a high traffic area. These are just high flyers, top 10 franchise in the United States. And the last thing we're going to talk about here are cooperatives. And cooperatives are nothing to do with franchises, or we're just talking about a business here, because these are businesses that are owned and operated by their members. And they can be anything. Notice it says producers, consumers, etc. There are approximately 750,000 co-ops worldwide, and there's about 120 million co-op members in the United States. These are democratic organizations. The members vote for management, etc. So it's one of those things that it's an anomaly in some cases when it comes to a business. All right, we're almost 6 o'clock. We're going to take a break to 6:05. We will extend past 6:30 this evening because Chapter 6 is very interesting, and we want to spend some time on this. So please come back at 6:05.
My time was break. Yeah, and then we're going to the last You don't want it?
All right, 6:05, we're back. We're ready to start chapter 6, entrepreneurship and starting a small business. The learning goals for this chapter explain why people take risks for entrepreneurship, put the attributes of successful entrepreneurs, describe entrepreneurial teams, entrepreneurs, probably a new word for you. Some people claim it's not a word, and home and web-based businesses. Now we're going to discuss the importance of small business to the American economy and summarize the major causes of small business failure. Hopefully we're going to summarize how small businesses operate, analyze what it takes to start and run a small business, and then outline the advantages and disadvantages small businesses have in entering the global marketplace. This gives us a definition of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs in a way, if we want to stop and think about it. We really kind of talked about what an entrepreneur is and entrepreneurship in chapter 1. And I don't really think that we need to spend a lot of time on this, except other to say that this is a person who accepts the risk of starting a business. Now, it also goes on there to say, pardon me, not only starting a business, but running a business. But I would like to tell you that a lot of entrepreneurs start a business and then they go on to something else. May get somebody else to run that business for them. They go on to something else. And because a lot of entrepreneurs like the excitement of starting something. They don't want to do the part of running something, which takes a little bit more time and effort on occasion. You can see this particular picture on page 148 in your text. And then if you would look immediately below this picture, you will find a number of, a little information about a number of large companies, well-known large companies in the United States that started, well, here it is right here, with little or no money. DuPont, Ford, Avon, Kodak. Of course, Kodak is different today than what it was. Amazon is mentioned here, and I don't think, yeah, Amazon is mentioned here. There are a couple other ones that are not mentioned here, that are mentioned here or not mentioned in your text, and vice versa. This gives you some interesting information about how things started and how they got started, and we don't think about those things. And here is one about success knowing no age, and a number of people in here. You can see this in the spotlight on small business on page 149. My favorite one they do not have in here, and that's Colonel Sanders, the starter of what used to be called Kentucky Fried Chicken, now called KFC. Colonel Sanders actually had a business that was successful. He owned a restaurant and motel in Corbin, Kentucky. The interstate came in and effectively put him out of business. And so he decided he didn't want to retire. He was, by the way, he was getting Social Security when he started KFC. So he and his wife went around the country. He would dress up in the colonel's suit that you see the caricature today, and his wife would dress up in an antebellum outfit, and they would cook this chicken at various restaurants around the country. And of course, they had the 11 herbs and spices that they would, once they signed a contract, they would send to the company. What they asked for was a nickel for every chicken dinner that was sold. And he got the business up and running, then sold it out, then came back to work for the company as a spokesperson for a number of years. But what this says is you're not restricted by age to starting a business. You don't have to be young. You can be anybody, anytime you want. You have an idea and the marketplace is interested in it. The sky's the limit. Now, as this goes on to tell you about a couple of things here, I'm not going to go into this. We kind of already talked about it. You're never too young to be an entrepreneur. And you're never too old. This talks about people here who, the highest rate of entrepreneurship in the United States is between age 55 and 64. And I just want to read that to you because I think most of us wouldn't think that. It's just something that it's there. And it could be, of course, that these people have been out in the business world. They've gotten some experience, and maybe they've taken an early buyout. Maybe they got laid off, and they say, hey, I'm going to start a business. And that's what they've done, and many have been successful. And why do you want to take a risk? Well, it's hard to say. This gives you some ideas here Obviously, you like to earn money. You're on your own. You want a challenge, and I think that's what a lot of people look for. And of course, obviously, opportunity. And we have to be, if we're interested in starting a business, no matter what our age is, we have to pay attention to opportunity. Uh, you know, what people are successful at is bringing a product to market that does one of two things. It either satisfies a need, meaning it's something that people have to have, or it satisfies a want, something that people would like to have, but don't have it for whatever reason it happens to be. Now we're going to talk more about this when we get to our chapters in marketing, but keep those thoughts in mind. It's a want or it's a need. When you did the Redbox thing, some people in the past have confused Redbox with a want. Excuse me, with a need. Redbox is not a need. Nobody needs to rent a video. A lot of people want to rent them, and so that's what Redbox did. And so it satisfied something people wanted to do. What does it take to be an entrepreneur? I think that there's some good things to look at here. I think the first one and perhaps the most important one is listed right there. That is, you have to be self-directed, and you can't be waiting for somebody else to give you orders. I think the last two are very interesting as well. You have to have a lot of energy because it's going to take a lot of energy, and then you have to be not be concerned about things happening outside your control. That's what would mean a lot of uncertainty. Remember, there's two kinds of environments that any business operates in. It operates in an internal environment and an external environment. You can control your internal environment, but you cannot control the external environment. And so you have to be able to learn in many cases to adapt to the external environment. It's important. In many cases, it tells you what you can and can't do, such as government restrictions and laws and regulations. But you can't let that overwhelm you. And now, obviously, there's a thing called competition. That's part of your outside environment too. There's a way, in some cases, you can control that part of the outside environment. Make a better product, sell it for less money, have a better operating, because a better sales force, whatever it happens to be. And so you can counteract that, but most of the outside environment you can't. So that's where this uncertainty comes in. This talks about 5 ways to start a business while you're at school. Now, this pretty much is talking about a traditional school, and while we can't be considered untraditional because we're not doing things that are not traditional, we're delivering instruction for the most part non-traditionally via the mode we're doing here tonight. Now, our criminal justice program out in Los Angeles is just different, a lot different. They actually have people come in and meet and do a traditional type a classroom thing augmented by the online environment. So this is just things that you think about doing here. I don't know too much when maybe you were at a different institution before you came to Union. But I remember when I was in college, you would always find notes up on the bulletin boards in different halls and things about people who would type your paperwork for you for a price, or they do running errands for you, or things of that nature. So businesses and colleges have been around for long periods of time. Now, this talks about an idea as a good opportunity. Notice it starts off if it fits a customer's needs, but also if it fits their wants. You're going to see that when you get to the pillow pets thing. And obviously, you have to have the ability to be able to satisfy that. That can come from up here. It can come from your hands being able to do something. It could come from a strategic alliance as you strike with somebody. It can come from a number of different methods. Notice the next thing that whatever you are able to produce, you can sell at a profit. And one of the things, and by the way, I'm probably going to repeat this again when we get into some other chapters, we talk about pricing goods and services. One of the problems that many small businesses have is they feel that the only way they can compete is to compete at a lesser price. And then they find out that they can't earn a profit at a lesser price. Now they're in a bind because it's easy to lower prices, but it's very difficult to raise prices. And so it's just something you have to stop and think about. And you know, the next thing is this fourth bullet here talks about a window of opportunity. The window of opportunity probably doesn't stay open very long. Now, you know, don't think about it being a day or a week, but it doesn't stay open long in the grand scheme of things. And so you have to be able to get there and get into that and get that done. And then once you're established, you're in pretty good shape. There are entrepreneurial teams. People have gotten together. What I have found, not necessarily personally, but what I've found in some of my research and readings and things is that entrepreneurial teams don't last for a long period of time. Notice the three people here who started Apple. The other, of course, Steve Jobs is now deceased. The other two guys may still own Apple stock, but they have nothing to do with Apple anymore. And so Steve Jobs pretty much took that over. And I think you'll find that in a lot of places. Some have stayed partnerships, but or entrepreneurial teams, as they're talking about here. But in many cases, they haven't. And so it's not something I'm saying don't do that. But it is like the partnership. You have to make sure you have good agreements and people get along and things of that nature. A micropreneur, and by the way, this is probably a new word for you, and it's a relatively new word for me as well. These are people who are willing to accept the risk, but want to stay small. And they just don't want to grow any more than what's going to happen. And I think you'll find a few of those, but those are the rare people. Most people get into this entrepreneur business, and the bug bites them to do more and more and more, which is fine. And that's not a criticism. That's just that tends to be the natural scheme of things. So we do find some of these. I do think it's interesting to note that many of them are home-based. And I can think of a friend of ours who has had a jazzercise business for, gee, long time. And I mean, probably 30 or more years that I can think of. And I don't think she's really ever expanded a whole lot. I mean, I know she had a place at one time, and she was not just running it out of her home. I think she had a place that she rented and did things like that. But she's never expanded to huge type things. So, and I think those types of businesses tend to be that way, and they promote like the slide says here, sort of a balanced lifestyle. And this is just talking about home-based business and the growth. And of course, you know, computers have just leveled the playing field in so many places that people are able to do that. And there's some other things to do, but what I would caution anybody to do if you're going to think about opening a home-based business is make sure you're zoned to do that, so that you don't run into trouble with the local authorities that you're doing something that's illegal or that's going to cost you more money, or you have to make special arrangements or things of that nature. So those are things to do for yourself before you do anything else. And this just talks about home-based businesses not being easy. That's true at any time, even if you have a business that's elsewhere, but you have an office at home. You have to separate office business from home. And, you know, you have to let everybody know that once I cross this doorstep here or this door sill here, uh, that's office. And I'm not going to talk about uh, household chores and things of that nature because when I get over there, I'm in the business mode. And that's very important to think about and to understand. It's not easy to do that. And so you have to be pretty self-directed when you think about that. There are several other things here that we talked about, but one of the things that you really have to be concerned about, and that's the last bullet on the slide, and that is making sure that if you have a home-based business or an office in your home, that's covered by your homeowner's insurance. It may not be. Some insurance companies will sell a rider for that. Some won't. So you just have to make sure that what you're doing is covered the way you want it to be covered. These are some benefits of home-based businesses, and I really don't want to spend a whole lot of time on that. I think we can think of it pretty much. You know, one thing, if you're running out of your home, you're not paying any rent or anything of that nature, and you know, there's no excuse me, there's no commuting, and there's tax benefits and a few other type things. But we don't have to spend a lot of time on it. Most of these things are fairly self-explanatory. There's the danger to that. The danger what I was going back to before. It's in your home, and you know, you have responsibilities at home, and sometimes it's difficult to divorce those two things. But you have to be able to do that. If you can't, then you either need to stop the home-based business, get out of it, or find a place where you can operate and you don't have to worry about being home. And here's some of the downsides, and we talked about these before. Isolation, limited workspace, zoning restrictions like I brought up before, and things of that nature. So think about those things, pluses and minuses. Decide what you want to do for yourself. This is just a little thing about you think you're ready to work from home, and I'm not going to go through that. Online businesses are booming. Talked about the sales reaching almost $173 billion 5 years ago. And retail sales for online have gone up, and we can expect them to continue going up. This talks about affiliated marketing, and what you do, you get in with other individuals and businesses, and you'll get something back for each customer, visitor or customer affiliate sends to your website. These are ways to boost your online presence. And you know, if you're understanding about the internet, and I'm not necessarily the best person to talk about this, but you have to be able to be found. If people can't find you, you're not going to be able to sell your product or your service. That's just as simple as that. I don't like to be the first word to use here, but certainly if you find something doing some other business doing something that really works, copy it. You know, as long as you're not infringing on somebody's copyright, that's not a problem. There's nothing wrong with that. And I just don't like to use the word that they use there at the beginning. And I guess the last one is, you know, be friendly. It's pretty difficult. It's pretty easy to be surly when you're going through the internet, talking to people online, and you just have to refrain from doing things like that. Now, these are people who are intrapreneurs. They are the folks that work for a company but have ideas like entrepreneurs, and therefore they work as an entrepreneur within a company. Uh, One of the most successful companies that uses entrepreneurs is what we're going to talk about here in the next little segment, and that's 3M, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Company, better known as the makers of Scotch brand cellophane tape. They do have people who are entrepreneurs. Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing has a philosophy that if somebody brings a new idea to the powers that be, and it looks like it's promising, the person will be given a 2-year contract, and to bring this product to fruition, they'll be given money and a staff and everything else. If after 2 years it doesn't work out, the person goes back to his or her former job. No questions asked, no recriminations. Well, I'm not sure Art Fry was actually one of these people, but he was trying to come up with a new adhesive. And the adhesive that he was trying to come up with didn't work very well. But it did help him because he was a member of his church's choir, and he could separate the pages in his hymnal. Well, I thought, hey, this is a good idea for what we know now became Post-it notes. And so he tried to entice his bosses into thinking about it, and they weren't interested. So then he started actually sending the memoranda with a Post-it note on it. And they thought it was great. And so that was the genesis of Post-it notes. Now, there's a little bit more to that story, and I'll tell you what it is. Post-it notes, 3M thought it was great, but they could not get the people that sold their products, their vendors, to take on Post-it notes. They didn't see the application for them. And so somebody at 3M got a brilliant idea and got the names of the executive secretaries at Fortune 500 companies and sent them Post-it notes. Well, the secretaries asked their suppliers, how do I get Post-it notes? Well, of course, they didn't have them, so they wound up buying them. But this is a story here of an individual who was an entrepreneur, Art Fry. There was another person involved with that. I never remember the other guy's name, but Art Fry was the primary guy. Governments do try to promote entrepreneurs. They have things like enterprise zones and incubators. Incubator will offer low-cost business office necessities. It says your basic services, that's fine. Enterprise zones are a little bit different. There are specific zones that are set up for new businesses, and they have special tax rates and things of that nature. What's a small business? It's something that's independently owned and operated and is not dominant in its field. And then, of course, the other part of that is that it meets certain size requirements. That's a bad term. Certain size, I'm going to say requirements. And that's mandated by the Department of Commerce. And as I remember correctly, one employee up to 499 equals small, 500 to 1,500 is medium, and anything over 1,500 is considered large. So requirements probably not the right word, but certainly limitations would probably be the correct word to use. This is a gee whiz slide that I like to talk about. There are a couple of things here that I think people ought to think about. But the number of small business firms, we talked a little bit about small business in Chapter 5 and its size and its importance to the GDP of the government, which is us, account for 50% of the GDP, generates 60 to 80% of the jobs, and about 80% of U.S. workers' first job were with a small business. Now, I guess my first full-time job after college was with a small business. I'd say full-time job because I was working for a hospital, but I was part-time there. And I was full-time in the summer, but I was part-time for the most part. But yeah, the first job I had after I got out of college was for a small business. I don't think it's around any longer, but it was. Now we talked about small businesses and the advantages and disadvantages, and we're mostly talking about sole proprietorship. But there's a couple of things here that are a little bit different than we talked about before. And one is this: what's a small business able to do? The small business is able to give personal service, and because you can usually deal with somebody right there. It doesn't. We're not denigrating large businesses here. We're just talking about what small business. And small businesses, if they expect to be successful, have to excel here. Personalized service. And then, of course, because they're small, they should be able to respond much quicker to customers' needs. Now, this is an interesting slide because what it says here is that small businesses are not as big of failures as people like to think they are. You know, there's a mantra that says most small businesses will fail within 5 years of opening. Notice what this says, that many small businesses are considered failures because the owner closes the business because he or she wants to start a new business or is going to buy a business and closes the old business. He or she may have changed the form of the business, and because it's no longer reported, maybe as a sole proprietor, it's considered as a failure. And the last is probably the worst. The small business owner decides that he or she wants to close the business because it's time to retire. And it's considered a failure. It should never be considered a failure. So we have to think about some of these things. That's not to say that small businesses don't fail. They do fail. We know that. But here's some reasons that are given that the Commerce Department keeps track of, and yet they're not failures. They can't even be considered failures. Here's some notional business failures. I'm not going to go through these. That Walt Disney's first film company went bankrupt. Henry Ford, first 2 car companies failed, and there's some other ones on there as well. And I think we just think about that because these folks became successful, and they didn't let failure stop them. How do you want to start a small business? You have to learn from other people. Many people that years ago would go to work for a department, not so much a department store, like for a hardware store or something of that nature, and then they would leave that hardware store and go open up their own, or they would find an owner who was ready to retire, and they would buy it. Obviously, you have to get experience, take over successful firms, what we were talking about before. Now, there's a downside to taking over a successful firm, and that downside is often those firms are associated with the former owner, and so sometimes taking that over, you run a risk of not being able to bring the former people along with you. This is just a making ethical decision, which I always encourage you to look at, but you're not required to work. Major functions of a business. This is what you have to do. First of all, any kind of manager, there's four functions of any management. There's planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. Now, this is what you also have to do here. Plan. You have to be concerned about finances. You have to know your customers. You have to be able to manage employees. And obviously, you have to keep records. Now, I had hoped to have some information for you on business plans. As I mentioned, I attended a conference in Miami 2 months ago, and one of the presenters had something about business plans. Unfortunately, uh, his presentation has not been uploaded to the uh, Society of Business Research website. All there is an abstract, and I can't give that. I can't use just the abstract to give you the information. So hopefully that will be posted uh, before the end of this course. And if it is, I will pass that along to you as an attachment. Nothing that you have to worry about. I know some of you are interested in starting a business, and it would be useful to you. Business plan, I believe, is essential. There are people that say they are not, but there are two reasons I believe it's essential. The first reason is a business plan keeps the person who wants to own and operate a business on track, and it gives him or her something to follow. The second thing I think is reasonable for is because if you're trying to get any financing, you have to have, for the most part, you have to have a business plan. Sometimes you don't, but for the most part, you need a business plan. And then there's other reasons to have a business plan, but those are the primary, at least to me. Uh, and it's very, very important that you do have a business plan. A good business plan. A good business plan does take, I'm sorry, there's a phone ringing here. I can't do anything about it. A good business plan does take time to write. You can have several people writing it, but there should be one primary author if you're interested in it. The most important part of the plan is the summary, the executive summary that's usually right at the beginning. And it's most important because that's about all a traditional investor will have an opportunity to read. So that is important. That has to, I like to say, has to sing, because if it doesn't, then nobody's going to pay attention to the rest of what you have in there. The summary, the executive summary, should be written after the business plan has been concluded, after you've written the rest of the business plan. Then you write the executive summary. If you're going into business with your family members, you have to spell things out. There should be a contract. Many families don't like contracts. They get excited about that. Why do we have to have a contract? We're all families, but yet this family squabbles are what cause a lot of businesses to fail. So there has to be clear expectations about who's supposed to do what and what's supposed to do who. Sources of capital for a new business, obviously what money you've saved, etc. You can get it from relatives, former employees. Of course, you can get it from either angel investors or venture capitalists. Venture capitalists are difficult to get money from because, well, they're not difficult to get money from. Sometimes you can get money from them, but they want their money back. And you have to be careful with them because they want their money. And it cost a friend of mine his business, a very successful business. And he had some venture capitalists lending money, and they said, okay, we want our money back. And he lost his business like that. Now, he came out all right, he's okay, but you have to stop and think about that because they want their money back, and they're not going to wait for it. Obviously, you can get funds other ways. I'm not so sure any of these are really very good, but you can do some of that. Make clients pay up front. That's probably the easiest thing to do, and it's probably the thing that you can do easiest to be able to get money. Obviously, there's commercial development that you can borrow money from, and these are good ways to do that. Notice that only 1% of that money was not paid back, period. Social lending, a couple of places you can go, Kickstarter and Lending Club. I don't know anything about these. These are just a couple of places online, so places that you can find that. Small Business Administration is the good place to start. They're located in most every federal building in the country. They do have things called microloan programs, etc. Stop and see these people. They can point you in the right direction, get you on the right track. And if they can't get the money from them, they can point you to lenders. And this is what this is talking about. Their Small Business Investment Company, which comes through the SBA. They can get you to the right place. They can help you with SBA people, can help you with your business plans, etc. Good place to go. And after all, it's a government agency, and we, Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer, are paying for that. I don't mean you have to be smart aleck, but it's a service the government does have, and you should do that. Small business development centers, jointly funded. Notice there, they're able to evaluate the feasibility of your idea and help you with your business plan. So try those out as well. But again, I think the Small Business Administration should be your first place to go. Now, this is a Community Advantage, a Small Loan Advantage program. I don't want to go into this too much because this is something that I think should be the purview of the Small Business Administration. So talk to these people and then go the direction that they point you in. Some more information here for small SBA resources and other helpful groups. And this is the market that you have. The market, just defining the market. We have people with unsatisfied wants and needs, and they're looking for someone to come in and take care of those. And you have to find out what they are and jump in there and fix it. This is a problem for everyone, no matter the size of business. That's managing employees. A lot of times, small companies will find employees are more satisfied because they have greater interaction with the boss. But you still have the same problems, and you just have to make sure that they're addressed and they're addressed properly and done at the quickest time possible. This is another problem where small businesses have issues, and that's with accounting. Get a good accountant, find a good accountant, stay with him. Yes, it costs a little bit of money, but you're going to be way ahead. He or she is going to help you much better and keep you from staying up nights and scratching your head. Get legal help. Get legal help. You can go to usually a lot of big cities that have legal counsel. They can direct you. The Bar Association can direct you to the proper places, and will help you with things like contracts and leases and things of that nature. Yes, again, it's going to cost you a little bit of money, but you're better off doing it as legally as possible without having a lot of hoorah from other people. Market research, you have to do this. We're going to talk more about market research when we get to the marketing chapters, that's the chapters 13 through 16. And so I'm not going to discuss that here this evening. Other forms of help that you might need, a loan officer with your bank. Go to a bank that's small business friendly. Insurance agent, get with them. Service Corps, retired executive SCORE. Those people are also associated with the Small Business Administration, or the Small Business Administration can direct you to them. Wealth of knowledge and information. So if you can hook up with those people, do. What it says here is the market is open for small businesses wanting to do business overseas. You can hook up with the Commerce Department and they will point you in the right direction. And this is just emerging markets and entrepreneurship outside the United States. Again, it's something that if you're interested in doing this, try to find someone with the Commerce Department. If you're in a big city or near a big city, go to the Federal Building and look for somebody with the Commerce Department. They can point you in the right direction. Well, that brings us at 6:46. That brings us to the end of chapters 4, 5, and 6. Do you have any questions for me?
No.
All right. I thank you for tuning in. I hope you find these useful to you. And I have, by the way, I've looked at your assignments. I'll be providing you some feedback tomorrow.
Thank you.
Okay?
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Good night.